So good morning, everybody, again. Thanks for coming to this very exciting breakout session where we can talk about resident services and operating budgets with regard to how we can translate what we assess at application in a way that translates to ongoing operations, ongoing successful operations. The very first question that we have was an example of the items that we could consider. One of the suggestions has been is puppy or poopy, or how about per unit per year operation costs? Is it an appropriate metric in assessing funding applications? Any feedback on that? What are your thoughts? There's been
Crystalline, can I share?
yes, please do, Kevin.
Okay, so right now I feel like every single project right now is has costs that are greater than probably what they initially shared in their application. I mean, I feel like that's pretty relatively common. And I feel like we really need to do some soul searching on the performance side of things about like what is it going to be realistic like in the future. And I think that there's a lot of unknown factors at this point, and that can be pretty challenging, particularly around, I think you brought up insurance as one of the cost escalating factors. I also think that we need to talk about property management as well, and like what type of property management models can really long-term protect the asset. There's a money discussion of like what's the right amount, but there's also like what's the right culture, and we need to have both of those things and both of those discussions happening about each project in order to sort of get a clearer picture in my mind.
Kevin, thank you for that. That's an excellent example of how we can use the retro boards to capture this. You'll see on the retro board, I believe there are 3 columns. Kimber, would you share can you share the retro board by chance?
On screen, well, Britt has shared the link to it in the chat there. So if you could access it that way, do you want me to share my screen on that?
Yeah.
Okay. Let me.
There is an added column for other topics, and I think that would be a great place to park the property management conversation with regard to the ability for us to get our heads around that when we consider the items that we can appropriately assess with regard to future funding, right?
Are you seeing that shared then?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there's the 3 questions and then the other comments column. And just click the plus sign to add a comment.
Can everybody see Kimber's screen? Excellent. Good deal. Yeah, so with regard to the discussion or the consideration for what we would want to consider for metrics, I think listing out the factors to be considered, and then how do we get our heads around those unknowns and the changing landscape that we're seeing with regard to, how you set a threshold or how you evaluate and compare. We have our first retro comment. Yay. Any other discussion about what we might consider, whether that be PUPY, the per unit per year. What else could we be doing? As from asset management perspective, I look at things differently as a state agency than I would as a developer. But what is asset management doing out there separate from per unit per year? What metrics are working for you? Everything, nothing? Does it change by the day? Well, if you can't, if something comes to mind, I believe we have a week with the survey, and I don't know for sure if the retro boards are up for a week. I think they are up for a week. Is that what you were talking about?
No, the retro boards are available right now.
Only
My
through
understanding
today.
during the meeting.
Okay.
And then the survey will be, the links are provided and that's open for a week following the meeting.
So if you think of something in the next couple of days that would be valuable with regard to the metric, feel free to include that in the survey. And I believe you can access that survey multiple times, so it's not like one and done as well. All right, well, let's talk a little bit about question number 2. How should resident service budgets be evaluated at application? One thing that has been kicked around is a ratio of what the cost of a resident service plan compared to the per unit per year was a concept. That way, the things that affect the per unit per year that are unique to regions or populations served wouldn't overestimate the number with regard to a ratio. So if it was a percent of per unit per year for resident services, would that be a reasonable way to assess a budget that's appropriate for a proposed application? Anybody seeing any trends that make sense with regard to resident service programming? I called out that they are difficult to measure because they are so unique, and the concern that I have and that I shared about limiting that is that we could just water down the effectiveness of our program. So, and historically, an assessment of resident services was based on agency priorities. And so if it appeared to meet the priority, it's a yes. If it didn't, it's a no. So what could we do to better refine that assessment? So let's talk about protecting the budgets. So let's say we figured this out. We're able to assess resident service programming and applications in a way that we think identifies the appropriate programming. How do we ensure that those budgets don't get absorbed when operating budgets are out of line or go over, especially considering the dynamic nature of operations these days? What are your thoughts? There's a comment in the retro board, resident service budgets should take into account the largest population served. Developers with projects that have higher eviction rates should be evaluated based on the resident services spending with the goal to have lower eviction rates. Any other suggestions, recommendations? You know, we've got another one. As we consider the populations, the needs of the populations that we're supporting or we're prioritizing in our work, is it reasonable to think that we can if we can focus on those priorities and design a resident service model that meets the population of that property, right? How do we do that? What's the mechanisms for assessing the effectiveness, the overall effectiveness of a plan when we have special populations that we're serving? Track record with operating resident services at certain costs could be considered, also depending on if there's a specific population to be served. Having a realistic FTE per unit per year for resident services in the pro forma could reference program operations, mission, the theory of change. Anything on how we protect those budgets? Any recommendations on what we can do to ensure that they don't get gobbled up? I think this next question addresses that. Partnering with appropriate service organizations, actually paying them and showing formal MOUs or contracts. And is that an application, I think?
So this is Dana. I think that would be at application. I think a lot of times, so I work in the PSH world and I see a lot of specificity around the service organization that's going to be a part of that program. But when you go to more just affordable housing with a services component, it gets a little fluffier in the application phase. So I think we could do a better job about understanding who's providing services, what's the formal arrangement with them, and how are we ensuring that they're reimbursed for services, and it's not just like a name drop in the application.
So it comes with some requirements for what those things would entail, right? So yeah, I got that.
Yeah, and to the other question about protecting the resident services budget, and I just wanted to mention, like with PSH program, we keep that services portion totally outside of the operating budget, to kind of keep it safe. But I know there's some, reasons not to do that. But yeah, just to throw it in.
Got it. And then is it a rolled up sub dollar that's in the operating budget as a whole, so you can assess the per unit per year overall costs?
I don't think we've done a lot of kind of collective review of all that, but I think everyone's getting $10,000 per unit per year, so we could just lob that 10K poopy, if you will, into the total poopy.
Got it. Interesting. So it looks like we've got some feedback on the third question, and we're down to 10 minutes left in our breakout session. So let's jump there and we can come back. Other than reconciling with periodic replacement reserve allocations, how can a replacement schedule benefit a project? There has been a note. We need longer mandatory affordability periods. We are facing a preservation crisis building in longer affordability periods is one way to tackle this crisis on the front end. Projects that serve higher need populations need higher replacement reserve allocations, but when they have lower income thresholds, it can be harder to stabilize a project. The government, I'm assuming, is proposing middle income subsidies in the future, and those middle income projects need 99-year affordability restrictions. So bottom line is to require longer affordability periods. And I think as part of the replacement schedule, knowing what your future investment needs would be in a project of that longevity would benefit at application as well. To take that to the next level, how would a replacement schedule be integrated into the application process then? Any ideas about that? As an asset manager, I love the idea of having plan, although we know plans don't always come to fruition. I think Kevin pointed that out with all the variations we're seeing in operations today. You can imagine that this would be even further from reality, but is it still a benefit? And if it is, then how do we assess it at the time of application? Anybody remember when replacement schedules were part of application? Other than CNAs at year 20 or so, do others create their own internal replacement schedule that they use for asset management on your portfolios? So if there is maybe the possibility that requiring one at application could serve as a template for that property on an ongoing basis in the future. And then Kevin, what was that we discussed? It's property management as a component of when we consider what metrics we can evaluate, including property management in that for that last column. If you're willing to add that in there, maybe that will spur some additional commentary that we could consider at application. That's
I'm working on it, but like I have so many thoughts. It's like, what do I even type? So
yeah. And you can edit your entry too, just so you know. And you can like other entries. There are several here. You can almost vote on these. So I'm happy to open it up for any other questions or dialogue that folks would like to chat about. What do you have? You want to stop sharing, Kimber? Anybody? This is just so much fun. It's such an exciting topic. Let's talk about puppies. With regard to property management, I could talk about that for a long time. Are there any recommendations on what the agency could do at application with regard to property management? Do you have recommendations for us?
Kristen, I've heard from some folks that some funders are unwilling to close on projects with with certain property management companies because they're losing faith in them. You know, we could explore what can we do to build more confidence with those investors. I don't know the answers, right? I just have questions. So and I can help us sort of point out some of the problems that we are experiencing. And our crisis in property management, you know, it gets bad press, which is bad for the agency. It's bad for people doing the development work. You know, nobody wants to read about what's happening at a project in the Willamette Week, right? We need to come together and figure out how we can meaningfully address this, right? And you know, you got to include a bunch of perspectives. You got to include the funders. You got to include the asset management. You got to include and think about the frontline property management workers. In my first PSH lease up, we had our entire roster of people helping lease up on the PM side quit. We went through 2 whole different staffs, right? And it can be tough, right? We're asking these people to work with folks that are starting fires in their property, right? Or robbing other residents, right? And that is challenging, right? And then we also need to think about it in terms of like from the tenant perspective, right? We can't just make these decisions in a vacuum and have the asset management and the bankers sort of, you know, figure it out, right? Like tenants want to live in a place where it has a sort of a good culture, right? And so when you have a good culture at your property and you have more holistic property management and everybody sort of makes a higher wage and things like that, I think that you're going to see longer term health in the asset, right? I mean, that's speculation on my part, but I feel it in my heart to be true. And so how do we get there? And you know, some of you have a lot more expertise in this area than I do, and I think that just participating in those conversations and being willing to collaborate on a solution to our property management crisis would be one way that the agency can really help on this.
That's good information. If you can figure out a way how to add that to the Easy Retro board, I think that would be very helpful. And I am imagining that others here would be in agreement. You think?
Oh, yes, you're speaking my language. This is Kimber. I've been one to look at management approvals on properties throughout the portfolio. And that is the subject matter you just brought up, Kevin, is what I've been trying to point out for quite some time now is how do we help in this situation? We can't just keep doing as we've been doing. So I really appreciate your commentary.
And to understand what role OHCS can in that.
Absolutely, yeah.
It's really important. You know, as a regulator, there are limits to what we can and cannot do, but hearing the kind of feedback that I'm getting today, I think substantiates maybe thinking outside of the box, right? Getting creative with this.
Yes.
Anybody else? I find it interesting to hear that investors are having a struggle and losing confidence. I mean, let's face it, property management's difficult at best already. And then you throw these layers on top of it that complicate it even further. And so what do you do with all of that? Good questions. Good stuff, I think. Well, I'm going to make another plug for the Easy Retro boards. I know that they are a valuable piece to the work that we're trying to do and sorting out how we're going to realign this funding structure. So please do consider adding your thoughts to that and also participating in the survey. I think it will make a difference. It will be heard, it will be listened to, and there is an expectation that we explain ourselves when it's all said and done on how we considered what was included in this feedback in our ultimate plan. And so I'm anxious to see how that looks and what kind of creative ideas you all can help us come up with. So thank you, everybody, and good luck and have a great day.